What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We are coming at you from the Indiana Convention Center in Indianapolis right now. The workouts at the NFL Scouting Combine are now underway. The interviews with the media, the interviews for players with teams, those are ongoing. There's lots happening here right now, and boy, oh boy, is it crowded. The number of credentials that get handed out for the combine seems to grow every single year. I should try to track down the actual number, but try to conceptualize just how many people are here from every single NFL beat. And that's media alone. Now factor in all the national media that's here, all of the front office personnel that are here, the coaching staff that are here. And it's not all 32 coaching staffs. We know, again, Sean McVay and the Rams, that's the obvious example. They've been very open about how they don't come to the combine. But my goodness, is it a lot of people? And there will be a lot of people back here tomorrow. We are recording this on Thursday afternoon. Friday morning is when a lot of the quarterbacks will be speaking. Of course, we in New England will be highly interested in what goes on in those back and forth. So looking forward to that. But right now I wanted to talk about a bridge quarterback. I want to use this episode of Next Pats to talk specifically about Justin Fields. And we talked a little bit about Fields in an episode earlier this week, talking about how people in Chicago really like this guy. Did they like him enough to pass on a quarterback with the number one overall pick this year? Probably not. I would say that's unlikely. Coaching staff in Chicago loves Justin Fields' toughness, love his ability to play through injury, love his quiet leadership. Obviously love his athleticism. He's able to make plays that very few people on the planet are able to make, is how one coach described it to me. And there are people there in Chicago who think over the course of his career, he will win a lot of games. And the reason why I bring him up for us here on Next Pats now is because, in my opinion, he's the best bridge option, quote unquote, quarterback available to the Patriots. And I would say specifically if they aren't sold on the top three quarterbacks in this year's draft. Everyone you talk to still believes that quarterbacks are going to go 1, 2, and 3 in this year's draft class. The order in which they come off the board and the teams selecting them, still in question. But that's how good these top three quarterbacks are. And so that's the expectation right now. I also would add, to me, JJ McCarthy seems like an early winner here, and he is expected to be a quote unquote winner at the combine this week because he's expected to work out, run faster than maybe people believe, weigh in a little bit heavier than people are anticipating. And it's my understanding he's interviewed well. What I've been told is that all three of the top quarterbacks have presented well this week, but McCarthy has stood out to some. And so good for him. To me, based on everything that I've heard over the course of the last few days here, is that he should be the fourth quarterback taken in this year's draft. And where that means he will end up being drafted, I think that's inside the top 15. It might be inside the top 10. It could even be inside the top 5. If a team gets excited enough about JJ McCarthy's potential, would they be willing to deal with the Chargers at 5? Deal with the Arizona Cardinals at 4. We know they're not interested in a quarterback. The receivers, the more I talk to evaluators, the more I believe the top receivers are more tightly bunched than people would be willing to believe coming into this week widely. Marvin Harrison, huge name recognition value there because of his father, and obviously played on a big stage at Ohio State, and obviously is very physically talented. But Rome Odunze has huge fans here in Indy. Malik Neighbors has huge fans here in Indy. And so maybe a team like Arizona that might be willing to get a weapon, or not willing to, but might prioritize getting a weapon for Kyler Murray, is willing to move off that spot for a team that wants to make sure they get JJ McCarthy. I ain't ruling it out, be that as it may. If the Patriots aren't sold on any of those top three, or McCarthy for that matter, Justin Fields to me makes sense as a bridge guy. Again, toughness, plays hurt, exhibited a quiet leadership. What have we heard from Gerard Mayo and Elliott Wolf when it comes to the traits they're looking for in quarterbacks? Toughness. He has it. I also would just point out, because of Elliott Wolf's background, which has been widely discussed, quote unquote, the Packer way. We know the way his father, Ron Wolf, approached things, always wanting to make sure that you're getting the quarterback position right by allocating resources to that position on a regular basis through the draft. But it doesn't just have to be through the draft. Ron Wolf made one of the most impactful trades of all time back in the early 90s when he acquired Brett Favre for a first-round pick from the Atlanta Falcons. Would his son Elliott be willing to give up not a first-round pick, but maybe a third for another physically gifted quarterback who has disappointed with the team that drafted him? That was the Favre situation. Now, the reasons why Favre wasn't working in Atlanta and the reason why Justin Fields wasn't working in Chicago, those are two different things. But I think philosophically speaking, doing whatever you need to do to make sure you're getting the position right and make sure you're devoting resources to the position to ensure that you get it right. Trading for Justin Fields would, in my opinion, sort of fall in line with that philosophy. Acquiring Justin Fields would also allow you to, if you do end up drafting a young quarterback, or say you like the idea of Justin Fields for more than 1 year, guaranteeing him a fifth-year option, is that a great idea? I'm not so sure. But even if you look at it as a 2-year investment, 20 plus million for year 5. If you pick up the option, a couple million this year. If you believe he's a starting caliber NFL quarterback, that's still kind of a steal. Why does that matter when it comes to the Packer way? And as we try to put ourselves in Elliott Wolf's shoes, well, we also know that the Packers have the ability to sit their quarterbacks and allow them to marinate and allow them to grow and allow them to learn behind the scenes, work on whatever it is they need to work on physically to make sure that when they do get their opportunity to start, they're ready. Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love. Elliott Wolf even referenced this during his podium session the other day. That Packers model has clearly worked for them. If you bring in somebody like Fields, you're allowing your young passer, again, whether it's a rookie taken this year, maybe it's a rookie taken next year, that allows that person potentially to sit and wait. Last thing I'll say about the Justin Fields opportunity before we get to a great interview with ESPN's Courtney Cronin. She is so tapped in on all things Bears. She gives us some great intel on Fields, but how Fields' teammates reacted to him, how his coaching staff reacted to him, how he's grown over the course of the last 3 years, what it might cost to acquire him. She was tremendous when we had the opportunity to speak to her here in Indy. But from a Patriots standpoint, again, the benefits of Fields to me, outside of who he is individually as a player, and even outside of what he might do for the next young quarterback in New England in terms of allowing that player to bake, is that it gives them some flexibility in this year's draft to not have to force it at the top. Maybe it allows you to trade back, get a tackle in the first round, a receiver in the second, and then maybe you feel like you're cooking. It also could allow you to, in that scenario, allow you to stockpile assets. You may be sitting there saying, why would the Patriots want to give up a valuable third-round pick, a high-end third-round pick, for a guy who hasn't proven all that much in a hell of a lot of opportunities in Chicago? Over 3 years, has he established himself as a franchise guy? What I would say is no. But a third-round pick, if that's what it takes, is a small price to pay for someone who I think still has untapped potential. And for someone who might allow the Patriots, again, if they don't love the quarterbacks at the top of the draft, to trade back, and then that third-round pick that you gave up for Fields is an afterthought. If you move, for instance, from 3 all the way to 12 and you trade with Sean Payton, who gives you 12 overall, where you can take your tackle, gives you a 2025 first-round pick, a 2026 first-round pick, and a third-round pick. That would be the equivalent of what the Niners gave up to move from 12 to 3 a handful of years ago when they drafted Trey Lance in 2021. So the flexibility, the ability to prepare for the future, the ability to prepare a young quarterback and allow that player to learn behind the scenes, however briefly that might be, the leadership, the toughness. To me, in my opinion, Justin Fields is, if you don't believe in the top 3 quarterbacks in this year's draft class, Justin Fields is the Patriots' best bridge quarterback option. So you know how I feel about this particular topic. What does Courtney Cronin think in terms of Justin Fields' potential fit in New England? Let's get to our conversation with Courtney right now. We're very excited now to have on the Next Pats podcast Courtney Cronin, ESPN, so tapped in with all things NFL, but Bears specifically, Courtney, and we're very fascinated by the possibility of Justin Fields making his way to New England. Let's first start with this. Mm-hmm. Is Justin Fields going to be traded? Do you feel that way?
It does feel that way. If you're kind of reading the tea leaves of what Ryan Poles told us on Tuesday at the Combine, it's the first time he had ever entertained the idea that Justin wasn't going to be on the roster or won't be on the roster in 2024. And the idea of a timeline, getting this done before free agency, he just went so much more in depth about the potential options of how this thing could come to be that it just makes you think they're not going to do that. Dangle this guy out there and then all of a sudden bring him back and he's your franchise quarterback. It just doesn't feel realistic. And the opportunity here, they keep calling this a unique situation. Everybody you talk to, from Ryan Poles to Matt Eberflus to new offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, who we talked to last week, talks about the fact that they have the number 1 overall pick in back-to-back years. And Waldron put it perfectly. He's like, that's very rare for that to happen. It doesn't happen that often, so it's an opportunity cost that I don't think they can afford to pass up, and that's why, as we're here in Indy, as we're listening to the chatter at these bars late at night to see what the Bears are ultimately going to do, I think right now we're all on Fields trade watch over the next 2 weeks.
So now let's get to the Patriots. Is there any possibility that he ends up in New England? It feels like there are a variety of landing spots that make sense for him. I wonder if the Patriots are at an advantage at all in that their picks in the second and third round are at the top of the second and the top of the third round. And I wonder what the asking price would be for Justin Fields. Do you get a sense for what they might be looking for there? And might that put the Patriots in the driver's seat, so to speak?
It sounds like a second to third round pick is the absolute starting point for Justin Fields. I know the idea has been floated out there that maybe they could get a first round pick for Justin. They're not getting New England's first round pick for Justin Fields, but that second round pick, they have a void right there because they sent theirs, which was the 40th overall pick, to the Washington Commanders in exchange for Montez Sweat. They need to bridge that gap because they go from 1 to 9 to 78. So it's not, there's a lot of good players that would be off the board by the time that they get there in the third round. So recouping that draft capital is where all the conversations have to start when it comes to Ryan Poles and potential teams that are looking for Justin Fields.
Do you think he could be a franchise quarterback?
I think he has the tools. You can win with Justin Fields, and every team will have a different viewpoint of how do you can we be the people who get the most out of him? And sometimes there's a level of arrogance about that in the NFL that, because it didn't work here, it's going to work here. There are things he needs to do in his game that he has to clean up. The situational football that Matt Eberflus talked about yesterday when he was asked about now that you've done this for a few years, what do you look for when you evaluate a quarterback? And a lot of it actually kind of spoke to things that Justin struggled with. The third downs, the end of half situations, a 2-minute drive, turnovers in the fourth quarter. Those are things that have been with Justin over the last couple of years. Now, did he get better in those areas? Yes, but there still is that giant question mark. And I remember I had one general manager tell me this as I was writing a piece on what the conundrum the conundrum the Bears face. It's that if there's indecision, that's a decision that you already know. If you don't have clarity, then you do have clarity on the quarterback situation if you are the Bears sitting on the number 1 overall pick.
I wonder about, and you mentioned, the football, the tangible stuff, the stuff you can see on tape, 2-minute drill, third downs. Obviously, physically, there's a lot that he brings to the table. What can you tell us about what you've gleaned in terms of the impact he's made on the coaching staff or his teammates? Does he have that intangible stuff? We're listening to Elliott Wolf and Gerard Mayo for the Patriots this week talk about just how important the confidence level that you have at that position is, how you're able to elevate your teammates, how critical that is.
How did he fare in those regards in his first 3 years?
We will always go back to the week 3 press conference where Justin was talking about the Bears were in an 0-2 hole. He's talking about overthinking games and says, well, what do you think might be causing that? He says coaching. And a lot of people are going to blow that out of proportion. I know from talking with his former coaches that were on the staff and are now not on the staff and are on other teams, they still hold Justin in the highest regard. They still communicate with him regularly. He is someone who people can get behind, whether it's the coaching staff or the locker room. And every player I spoke with over the last couple of months inside the Chicago Bears locker room has said nothing other than he's the leader, he's the guy we want in our franchise, he's the guy we want leading us, because they see him take hits. They see him, risk his body and go back in, just bounce right back. And there's something to be said about that. And he's remained so even keel throughout all of this, all of the noise about Caleb Williams that dated back to, in the middle of the season last year when he gets injured with his, he has a thumb injury, he comes back and he's got 7 games to prove himself. The amount that was on his shoulders, people inside the organization know what that meant. Like the fact that he was didn't waver during any of that. So if it's New England, if it's Atlanta, if it's Pittsburgh, if it's anywhere, you're getting a quarterback who very quickly can win over a coaching staff and win over a locker room.
Last thing I want to ask you is about the draft and about where the Bears sit there, obviously with the first overall pick. You just mentioned Caleb Williams. It feels as though there is some conflicting buzz on Caleb Williams, and this probably is going to be a big week for him in terms of the impression that he makes in interviews and face-to-face sit-downs. Is there any chance the Bears don't take Caleb Williams with the first overall pick?
It's a question I've floated to scouts, to coaches, to execs that I've seen throughout the league this week here in Indianapolis, and the general consensus is there's still that mystery of where can you move down to and still get a quarterback who's ready to go right now? I mean, this is not taking a top quarterback and bringing him into a bad situation in Chicago. The team finished with a 7-10 record. The defense was one of the best in the NFL at the end of the season. They're going to get another wide receiver. They'll draft a tackle at some point. They'll get a pass rusher. This team is ready to compete next year, but how far you go down the draft board, you can't go past 3 without losing out on whether if it's not Caleb Williams, it's Drake May, that's Jaden Daniels. And I just, from the buzz that we hear, it just feels like Caleb is the upper echelon, and then there is a gap, I don't know how wide it is, but between Drake May and Jaden Daniels in that second tier of quarterbacks. But there's that's the point of these formal meetings. You get 20 minutes, but you also get a chance to test the temperature of this guy's psyche, of his mental makeup, to see, okay, will this be a good fit? Because this is a monumental decision regardless, whether they draft Caleb Williams, whether they stick with Justin Fields, whether they trade Justin Fields. They got to make sure, as Ryan Poles said, they've got to know the person. They've got to know the wiring and the mental makeup to make sure that they're ready, whatever the decision comes, to execute it one way or the other.
This week is so fascinating for them and their decision, because if they somehow move off of Caleb Williams, then that obviously shakes up the entire top 3 for the Patriots at 3 overall. And this week in particular, we know how those interviews can go, where you can poke and prod these guys and just see how they react. Show them a bunch of bad plays on their tape from this past year and try to work through that thought process and see how they handle it. Do you think they should take Caleb Williams?
I think that you don't get opportunities like this that often. Whether he's a generational talent, I know we throw that word around a ton. He is far and away the best prospect in this draft class. And when you have that opportunity with the most valuable capital in the NFL, really in sports, to have the number 1 overall draft pick at the top of a draft board that has players in rounds 1 through 7, I don't think you can pass up on that opportunity to draft Caleb Williams.
Whatever they do, it'll end up impacting the Patriots. Courtney Cronin, ESPN, thanks so much for all your insight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Great stuff there from Courtney. She is so dialed in on everything that's happening across the NFL. You see her on Around the Horn on ESPN all the time. She does such great work there. But with the Bears specifically, nobody better for us to have on and tell us everything that we need to know about Justin Fields. That'll do it for this edition of the Next Pats podcast, guys. We will have another one for you tomorrow. We're speaking to these quarterbacks tomorrow. Jaden Daniels, Drake May, receivers as well, interestingly. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas. We're going to have an opportunity to talk to some wideouts who I think will be available at the 34th overall pick. And that's noteworthy because, again, if we're analyzing the Packer way, and maybe we're overanalyzing it at this point, But if we do want to use that as sort of a blueprint for what the Patriots might do under Elliott Wolf, go back and look at how many first-round receivers the Packers have drafted. You going to find any there? What you are going to find is that they used a lot of second-round picks on that position that ended up hitting big. And so maybe 34 is the spot for the Patriots to find their next star pass catcher of the future. Talk to a handful of those potential options tomorrow, as well as the QBs. So stick with us. We've got you covered from every single angle here in Indy. We'll talk to you very soon.